Hello, everyone. Thanks for battling the beautiful weather to come out here tonight for this talk. It's, I think, probably the most beautiful day we've seen in New York in maybe years or at least months. That's how it feels. It's a real pleasure tonight to introduce a distinguished panel of curators and artists in anticipation of the opening of the exhibition So You Want to See, which is curated by VHV, What, How, and For Whom, a curatorial collective from Zagreb in Croatia, and three artists from the exhibition, Cecilia Vicuña, OKO, and Sanja Iveković. So I think we're quite a large group here tonight. And no one has seen the exhibition because the exhibition opens on Friday. I hope you can make it. It will be from 6 to 9, I believe, the opening. It's from 6 to 9, downstairs on the second floor. So I think what we will do tonight is Yvette from VHV will begin with a short description of their interests and their intentions in the exhibition. And the three artists in the exhibition will briefly describe their works, and we'll have a short discussion related to some of the themes of the exhibition, and then turn it over to the audience for questions. Just to introduce our guests, What, How, and For Whom is a curatorial collective formed in 1999 and based in Zagreb and Berlin. Its members are Yvette Julin, Anna Devic, Natasha Ilic, and Sabina Sabolovic, and designer and publicist Dejan Kirsik. Oh, is this the correct one? No, actually, this is maybe more updated. Is it? No, actually, this is. VHV organizes a range of production, exhibition, and publishing projects, and directs Gallery Nova in Zagreb. Since the first exhibition, titled What, How, and For Whom, on the occasion of the 152nd anniversary of the Communist Manifesto that took place in Zagreb in 2000, VHV curated numerous international projects, among which are the 11th Istanbul Biennial, What Keeps Mankind Alive, in 2009, in Istanbul, of course, and One Needs to Live Self-Confidently Watching, Croatian Pavilion at the 54th Venice Biennial in 2011. Recent projects by VHV include the festival Meeting Point 7 that took place in Zagreb, Antwerp, Cairo, Hong Kong, Beirut, Vienna, and Moscow, under the title 10,000 Wiles and 100,000 Tricks in 2013 and 2014, and the exhibition Really Useful Knowledge at the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofia in Madrid in 2014. And OKO, to my right, OKO's works have been shown in galleries and museums, such as the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Simultaneously, she also realizes projects in the public space, and her work is embedded within the urban street culture. Cecilia Vicuña is a multidimensional poet, visual and performance artist, filmmaker, and political activist who addresses pressing concerns of the modern world, including ecological destruction and economic disparity. Born and raised in Santiago de Chile, she has been in exile since the early 1970s after the military coup against President Salvador Allende. Cecilia Vicuña has been creating precarious works, ephemeral installations in nature, cities, and museums since 1966 as a way of hearing an ancient silence waiting to be heard. And Sanja Iveković lives and works in Zagreb, Croatia. She was raised in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, whose post-object art was usually covered by the umbrella term New Art Practice. Iveković's work is marked by the critical discourse with the politics of images and body. She was the first woman in the Yugoslav Croatian art scene to clearly express a feminist attitude, and she is probably the most known to New York audiences here for her solo exhibition at MoMA in, I think, late 2011, early 2012, which many of you may have seen. So it's a pleasure to have you. I'll turn it over to Yvette for an introduction to the exhibition.
Thanks. So You Want to See is obviously an exhibition dealing with ways of looking and observing. It presents 6 artists of different generations and from different geographies that actually work with distinctively different artistic and aesthetical investigation and methodologies. And yet, in the same time, it shows parallelisms of interests that these women artists all have, and that are dealing with the question of how do social norms become normalized and naturalized, and what role images have in this process. They all deal with regimes of repression and the way how they are manifested through representation, and the way how this representation and regimes of representation actually take hold through the mainstream media, and in which way they affect us, so that we don't even realize that they are constructed and they are not recognized as representations. Each of these artists is actually offering an alternative project for looking, for activating images in opposite direction. The denaturalization of images and estrangement of images is important methodology for all of them. And in this way, they are providing us with opportunities and possibilities into new ways of seeing that would go beyond mere observation. As I said, and as you probably already noticed, it's an exhibition of 6 women artists. Many of the works in the exhibition deal with the questions of women's struggle for equality and women's rights, both historically and in contemporary conditions. And yet the exhibition is primarily concerned with the way how we see things, and with an interplay of what do we between what we desire to see and what we obstinately refuse to see at the same time. The techniques such as appropriation, juxtaposition, critical reworking of documentary, combining various cultural references are some of the techniques that artists used in the exhibition in order to confront and subvert some common perceptions and the way we look at things, and perceptions of what is normal and what is accepted. They all strive in a way to make contradictions visible and to question the mechanism through which meaning is formed through visuality, and through which our interpretation of history is constructing, and maybe to point out to the way how this history can be read in different ways. Now I will go very briefly through the works in the exhibitions and the 6 artists, and then we can also give a chance to the artists that are here to talk a bit more about their work. So Carla Zaccagnini is doing a long-term project that is actually investigating attacks of the early 20th century suffragettes in the UK on the paintings and objects in the museums, in order to question the power of visuality and the way the images are taking part in construction of the female identity in the mainstream discourse. This is the famous Velázquez Venus that was actually attacked in 1905. What Carla is exhibiting in the show is actually the tracing of the cuts that were made on this painting in the National Gallery in London. And just to give you an example on how, or show you a bit how the larger project also looked. This is an installation of this work in Reina Sofia in Madrid, where she actually exhibited the book that is providing a wider context and research on these political actions and the text on paintings, as well as outlining the attacked painting on the walls and providing an audio guide on what these actions actually were. This is work by Sanja Iveković, Bitter Life. I will go really fast through it. And Sanja's work is characterized often by this technique of collage and by questioning the way in which mainstream media is actually producing images. And she, as in Bitter Life, she is putting together images from her own private, personal collections of images and for her life with images taken from media. In another work shown in the exhibition, Witches, she is putting images of various historical images of witches together with contemporary images of women that are in a way ostracized or judged by the mainstream discourse. OKO creates various phantasmagorical images that are conflating the fantasy and reality in a strange and equally humorous and disturbing ways. This is a work, obviously, in the city, and she is also trying to see in which way the street art and the art presented in the gallery can be conflate and interact in different ways. This is her work creating for the exhibition. Cecilia Vicuña, who is here with us and who will talk a bit about her action, is showing a film, What is Poetry to You, that was made in 1980 in Bogota, and that is actually a strong artistic action questioning the role of poetics in politically turbulent times. Rajka Malkalon shows several series of works that are all dealing with the question of the post-colonial imagery, or actually the colonial imagery and their traces that are still present in nowadays, and in the way in which anthropological and ethnographic actually imagery creates the perception of the other. And she is talking about actually the revenge of the images, and she is trying to turn these images upside down. This is the work that is called A Brief History of Conflict in Afghanistan. And these are all aquarels that now I'm showing from the series called Double Take. That is actually referring to the moment when an actor on the stage is actually looking twice to a certain object in disbelief. This is, for example, Fear of Black Planet. The Kama Sutra of Adam Smith. Artist Victoria Lomasco, who is an artist from Moscow, creating visual reportages of different marginal or disadvantaged communities in Russia, and providing a social commentary on the economic, political, and social situation in Russia today. This is a work dealing with the situation of sex workers in a provincial town in Nizhny Novgorod, also in a way dealing with the questions of internal colonialism within Russia. And this is just a few images from the work that she created following the trials for the Pussy Riot in Moscow. So the different reportages from the trials. So as the exhibition is as I said, to reiterate, trying in a way to deal with the question of how do we mobilize the way in which we see in order to question the possibility to create international solidarities and networks that are dealing with the question of feminism in both the feminism as a political struggle and as a struggle for the equality. Okay, I think, yeah.
Should we? Yeah. We have a problem with mic. Yeah, so I thought, okay, so now maybe we can, each of the artists in the exhibition can describe a bit of the works. Maybe you could start with your work on witches.
Right. Are we gonna see the images or
yes,
no?
Yes, I'm going back.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't have all of them, but we can decide. Yeah.
Okay. But I'm showing. I'm very flattered that my friends curators invite me to be part of this show, and I'm showing not only this piece, but there is another one. You've seen a few images. Yeah. It's called Bitter Life, which is an early piece that I did in 1976. And then there is a video, right? Yes, there's a black file. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it's really I'm surprised, and I'm very happy that I can show a number of work. It's important in a way for me always to show my work, which is in different media. You know, I'm not the artist who are using just one media, or I'm not painting. I don't know how to paint, but I work with the performances, video, collages, and public art interventions also recently. So in this case, I'm really happy that I'm showing this piece on witches. Actually, the title of the piece is She Too Old for This? And in brackets, on witches. I was actually commissioned to deliver a project, a work for a show that was curated by also a women collective in Zagreb, Container, and they were. They had the show, international group show, on the question. The topic was the old age, you know, the getting old, and I was actually thinking for some time that I should start to think about old age, being old myself, you know, and as usual I start from myself, you know, thinking about what does that mean, and. There are different reasons why I, for a number of years, I started to think about to make a project on the witches. One of the main reason was to deal with the case, which is one of the most the most shameful case in Croatia, in media, where 5 of my friends, my age, were how do you say? Yeah, they were
There was
abused.
like
I would say there is a media abusing these women. They call them witches, Croatian witches. You can Google them, 5 witches from Croatia or witches. You know, you'll find a lot of things because it went internationally. You know, they got obviously some support by feminists. But the reason they were really hunted, right, as witches, you know, the term witches were used very often, is because they were publicly attacked or maybe, you know, criticized the extreme nationalism in the 90s, which happened in Croatia. They were all, I mean, most of them were really already very, very well known public personalities, like the writers or philosophers, and this is something that did tell me that, you know, the witches are here. You know, it's not something that is belonging to the history. And then another amazing, for me, a very strong impression was to listen to Silvia Federici. I don't know if you know her. Some of feminists. She had a lecture in Zagreb. She was part of this subversive film festival. And unfortunately, I didn't know about her before, but then I was totally fascinated with her lecture. And of course, she came also to promote her book, Caliban and the Witches, which I highly recommend you read, all of you. I hope Silvia will come to see the show. I think it's the issue that that needs to be dealt with, because in her book, she does explain or write amazingly about the cases of the witches today, real witches in the Africa, in Ghana, for example. They are burned, they are again, prosecuted, they are discriminated, and so on. And then I also find this amazing drawings that were obviously in the medieval time. So using my favorite way of having these two images, or images dealing with the same issue, but also with in a different media. I made a series, and you will see only the selection here, because it's a long series of things. I think that's fine, is it?
Maybe just a few more words about bitter life.
Okay. They're very, very small images. You please don't expect the big one. OKO would do this to represent. Okay, this is the series that I called Gorki Život, Bitter Life. I also did at the same time 2 other series, or actually 4. But Sweet Life, the other series was called, I titled Sweet Life, and Bitter Life, and Double Life. And if you've seen if you've seen the show in MoMA, there are Double Life over there. Bitter Life was not so popular, I would say, but I did show it, and I think it's the strategy is the same. I just was browsing through my private photo album, and I find the photographs of myself, and And then at the same time, I was collecting, cutting out the clip, from the newspapers, from the Black Chronicles, And the important part here, you will have to pay attention to the texts, the captions, which are...
So, for example, here it says, the happiness never comes too late, Émile James and Georgette Laroche, under the, text from the newspapers.
Right, and here's me as a baby. Yeah, I think at the time I still am always interested in the life, in the media generally, but Black Chronicles, I don't know how they call them here, about crime pages.
Crime pages.
Crime pages, okay. Crime pages are real interesting in terms of representation, in terms of saying a lot about society, about how we deal with those that are on the margins or those that are outcast, and those kind of people are, I think, at least for me, the most interesting.
A listing of crimes.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have something like this? Kind of.
I mean, in the daily papers, it's still with us. At home we have this page which is only about criminal and
crimes and how would you say misfortunes or disasters or things like that.
But they're all about disasters are all over the page. Of course, the media. I mean, without it, it's not working. But those pages are more about private lives. What happened to the woman XY. This one and her husband, or what happened to a child, or the. So at the time, and still, I am interested, in public-private. The idea how the public life is represented in the public discourse, and how do we deal with this.
So in this situation, then this couple they could have been victims of a crime.
No, this couple, as the caption says, they're very. They belong to this strangeness, right? Because they're an old couple, and they get a baby, right? So it's not only crime; it's like this very strange things happening in life.
Okay, thanks, Sanja. So
if there would be any questions later, I would be very happy to answer.
So maybe next week I can move on to Cecilia.
Sorry.
Well, a ver, do you hear me? It's very hard to have a sense of whether the sound is actually getting out there. But to speak about this film, I have to really go back 500 years. So that so that you understand really where I'm coming from. And you have to know that the history of suppression and violence of the arrival of the Europeans in Latin America, in the whole of the Americas, of course, is still ongoing, and it's actually getting worse right now, as if that were possible at all, but it is. And so perhaps because I am a South American mestizo, meaning half Indian on my mother's side, and fully Indian on my mother's side, and a European on my father's side, since I was a little girl, I always felt that there was something really beautiful and magnificent that was being covered up, that was being hidden. And I didn't feel as a young girl that this was being destroyed because I was so much part of it. And I always was interested in these languages being spoken in a different way, in these tones, in this music, in this way of relating to the animals and so forth. And I suppose I became a poet and an artist because of that sensibility, that way of being. And so we will fast forward until I am 24 years old. I am studying art in London, and suddenly the military coup happens in Chile, and this communal, collective, magnificent, participatory democracy of which I was part and in which I had grown up was completely and utterly destroyed. And so when that happened, I felt even with more intensity the passion for the world that had been suppressed. And the communal, participatory world of oral culture from the perspective of the West is totally subversive. And it is subversive because it is a world where everybody is empowered to speak. Everybody is empowered to have a place in society, both men and women participate. And so this empowerment for me was always crucial as a definition of poetry, the right to speak. You must realize that I'm coming from a country called Chile, and in Chile, someone like Neruda or someone like Huidobro or Gabriela Mistral, the great poets of Chile, are something that is so present, I should say that was so present in the culture before the military coup, that you couldn't escape being in touch with what poetry meant and how poetry was part of social, cultural, and political life. And nobody even questioned this. This was part of the reality. Now, when the military coup came, this universe was completely forbidden and pushed aside in a most violent way. For example, my work was censored at the time of the military coup and continues to be censored in a very, very violent way. The book that I wrote in the 60s has just been published in Chile a year and a half ago. So it took 40 years for this erotic, autobiographical, indigenous, mestizo, wild, anti-colonial poetry to be kosher for Chile, you know. So that tells you that there is this sort of very violent desire to suppress the voice of the woman, the voice of the Indian, the voice of the Indian woman even more so. So I am in London when the coup happens, and I, in my poetry since the 60s, since I was a teenager, I was experiencing language in a very physical, in a very metaphysical, in a very sort of playful and free way. I spent my life writing and performing and doing things that were unannounced in the streets, in the beaches, in the mountains, everywhere. And so I was creating a sort of poetics that I call different names, like composition, for example. But by composition, I mean that what I am doing has a sort of effect or a consequence, not only in the life of those around me, but in the life of the ancestral world, in the life of the cosmos, in the political life of the moment, in the future, in the past. And if you ever come in touch or in contact with this kind of poetics, you will see what I mean. It's not the moment to go deeper into that, but all this is very important to understand why is it that I find myself in London during the coup, and I felt that the most important thing in that moment was the way the military coup had been conducted in Chile. When this happened, it was a preemptive move by the military of Chile, supported, of course, by the CIA in the US. As you know, they're very prone to this thing called the preemptive action. And so this preemptive action was, according to the military in Chile, to kill a project that they had invented. which was that the Allende government was going to kill thousands of people and still kidnap the children and send them to communist countries to be indoctrinated, and this was called Plan Z. So in other words, people in my family, my friends, I was only 24 years old when this happened, were being killed on account of a lie. So I started to see the difference between lies and truth in this sort of very sort of primary ethical code that had been erased by this brutal violence. And so I started to investigate deeply into language and how language represented lies substituted by a sort of pretend or pretense truth. And so that gave my poetry a sort of very, even more intense orientation as a way to participate in the conversation that was going on in the city. And I will not speak about what I did in London or what happened to my poetry in London, which would be more accurate, but I will speak of what happened next, which is that I felt that being an exile artist in London was sort of very wonderful, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in Latin America, where at the time this horrible wave of dictatorships and military coups was being supported by the US. So practically every Latin American country was under a dictatorship at the time, with the exception, I'm speaking South America, literally, of two places that were Venezuela and Colombia. And I happened to have these friends, Colombian friends in London, and I ended up visiting Colombia. I actually stayed 5 years. I was supposed to be there for a few weeks. But what I found in Colombia totally blew my mind. And this is, I arrived in 1975, and the people of Colombia at the time lived in a so-called democracy. There was this brutal civil war going on in the countryside with tremendous violence and displacement of poor people. But the city of Bogota, where I had landed, was a city where indigenous mestizo culture was everywhere, and it was blooming in this powerful theater movement. It was blooming in the poetry, not in the art. The art sphere was run by this very upper class art gallery, so I had no room there. They always hated me, despised me, so I had no room space. But I did have room in the theater world, and I did have room in the poetry world, because I was censored. I was censored by the principal literary contest, and I presented the manuscript, and this manuscript was deemed to be indecent and subversive, so out with you. Very good, but one of the judges published the story of how I had been censored, and I suddenly became a sort of superstar of the underground, meaning that everybody wanted to hear these dirty poems I had written. And so from one moment to the next, I became a sort of juglar. How could you translate that? These people who went around during the Provençal times speaking, singing their poems. Troubadour, thank you. I couldn't think of troubadour because that's French, but juglar, gracias Omar. And so I became a sort of troubadour of the dirtiness in words. And this was absolutely magnificent. And so all of a sudden there was this very powerful group of friends, and I decided it was time to investigate what people in the streets really felt about poetry. For me, poetry was, as Vicente Huidobro says, the life of life. Or it was, as Novalis, the German romantic poet, said, poetry is the original religion of humankind. So I wanted to confront these with the oral culture of Bogota. And so I gathered this collective, everybody put a little money. I had never done a film in my life. I knew nothing about cinema. Nobody seemed to care that I would be directing a film, and everybody was putting their money, including, people who didn't have a lot of money. And so suddenly we're out in the street, and the stories of how we did this film are marvelous, but I'm not going to tell you the stories. I'm just going to tell you, watch the film, because when people see this film, nobody can believe that these answers to my question. I went around asking prostitutes, policemen, beggars, people who had been displaced by the war and were living in these shanty towns, always in danger of being run over by the police. What was poetry to them? And because the Colombian people were still living in this oral culture, each one of their answers is so articulate and so profound and full of a philosophical view of life that when I have shown it in civilized places, meaning like in the US very rarely, people think that I scripted their answers. And they scripted, actually improvised their answers on the spot and always on the run from the police, because we did this without permission. That's it.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yeah, I mean, one thing which is interesting to mention about OKO is also has to do with the the title of the exhibition. So you want to see, and OKO, as some may know, means in Croatian it means I, right? But then OKO has a very interesting history where much of her start actually began. She's probably the youngest in the group here today, and she started when she began to create her art. The internet was a very important part of it, and as a form of distribution, right? But at the same time, your name is not known. Your real name is not known.
Yeah, because my real name is Marina, and there's already Marina Abramović, so one is enough.
Could you speak a bit about how you got started and about your work in the exhibition? And about the name of and
you
about
really
your
want to know
name.
about the name? I consider myself a spiritual person because I grew up on a village with a lot of animals around, and it's just nature, so it's fine with my grandma. But I was born in Yugoslavia, and I was 10 when the war started. And why that is important? Because, like in every war, there is a lot of nationalistic beliefs. So I was 10, and there's hyper-Croatian beliefs. And because Croatia, if you didn't know, it's mostly, not mostly, 99% white and Catholic. So 100% basically, yeah. It's a nice country you can come to visit, but this is something that we know, that we live there. So when I grew up from 10 to in that nationalistic Catholic beliefs, and then blah, 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 a lot of things happened. I draw, I go to academy. And then in one point in my life, I just decided, actually I would tell private stories. It's better that way to understand. I started to do art on streets because I didn't like the curator, not the curators, just all the things that you need to apply, and somebody look at your art and say that you're not good. They're like, what is that? And then I started to do stuff on streets. And a lot of people then like, why you don't do exhibitions in the real museums? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I did the next one, and I did. This is actually my first exhibition. So I came to the gallery and I did it's called the Four Prophets, from all the part of the town,
not the world. The last one is the West one. That's why we have crunches, because we're a little bit spiritually crippled. And they actually give me a small space, but I just started drawing, and it just started to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and they grow. And I won the prize. And that was for me, it was funny because I didn't know about the prize. So, what prize? What? Okay. And then the same year, I actually moved to squat, and I lived in a squat, and a lot of people, what's happening with her? And I started to feel really bad. But I would just keep on working. And then I ended up in a museum of contemporary art, and they gave me a 15-meter wall, and I did another massive drawing inside, but interactive sound. And that was funny because I was living in a squad, people talking about you, that you're falling down or something, and you're doing the better and better stuff in your life. But I always say, like, I just do what I do, I draw. Things just going. And after that, somehow, I think I'm younger, so when you're younger, people dream about to have exhibition in Museum of Contemporary Art. Like, that's the goal. You go to academy, then you go to a museum. So I was there. That's it. No. So because I like complicated things. I had a tattoo on my leg, like, don't be a local hero. I bought a ticket and I moved to London. And I'm going to tell the whole story. And when Croatia is new in European Union, but we can't work in London legally. So it was funny because I was living on the money that I earned from art in Croatia, post-war Croatia, in London. So it's a bizarre thing. But my life is a little bit funny. And then I had the show in V&A, and I remember I did the big drawings, and people want to ask me, how much is it? Can I buy it? And I was confused. No. And I just rolled them, pack them, and go to Paris for 2 months. And why I'm telling all this is going to be important. And then in one moment, the girls contact me that they want to have a show with me in Zagreb. So I flew to Zagreb, meet them actually for first time. I'm like, okay, cool. It was an amazing experience. So then I go back to London, keep on doing my life. And then they contact me like, we want to take you to New York. Like, what? Okay, life. And then I packed my stuff, and I was saying, is it the right decision? I'm like, yeah, it is. So I moved back to Croatia to do some stuff because I have projects with museum now again and blah, blah. But because I wasn't in Croatia for a year almost, and we have a new government, and they're really, in my opinion, maybe I'm too strict, but they're really nationalistic and really Catholic. Like, really, really Catholic and really nationalistic. And they're new, and we have a female my friends in London, they're like, congratulations, you have a female president. No, and they don't understand what I'm saying. Like, I can't even start to explain to you. So, and because I'm in Croatia after a year now, I really feel the difference. I don't know if the whole thing is changed or I was changed in London. So, because I know for New York it's quite normal, but in Croatia I'm too much tattooed. I have too many tattoos. All in all, what I get is people screaming on me on streets like, you're disgusting, blah, 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 or why are you not marrying with kids? And that's normal, and I'm 33. So, I'm old lady back home, basically. That's the truth, And my family was also like, what's wrong with you? I'm, I don't know, freak. So that's normal situation. I mean, it's not super, nobody gonna put rocks on you, but it's quite, I mean, on me, they definitely, on Main Square, they're yelling at me, like, disgusting, go, blah, blah, blah. And even my mom didn't believe me when she was with me, then she noticed. And it's funny because wherever in London, who cares? In New York, 1 of a million. But back home, it is. And it was funny because my tattoos are actually native Croatian Christian tattoos. So it's funny. I mean, I did it because I don't have a home. So for me, it was a route, where something that reminded me of where I am.
Interesting, like a kind of a play on familiar signs and unfamiliar ways.
Yeah, but it was funny because I go to
them.
church and they throw me out. Mm-hmm. Because one of my friends from London came like, you need to see cathedral. I'm like,
too many crosses.
Can you go out? Can you educate yourself? Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit I'm not a really quiet person. Obviously.
Yeah.
Only when I do public speak, then I'm quiet. But yeah, and while that is important, because of the work that I did down here, when the girls told me, it's actually about female artists, and I usually don't do that stuff. I don't do stuff that somebody else tell me. I just do my stuff and it go to show. And then I actually think about it, like female artists, like, and then of course you think about yourself, you're an artist. Mm-hmm. And then it was funny because when I was living in London, and then you talk about spirituality and different cultures and different people, different religions, and somehow it's not important. It's just you're a good human or a bad human, bye. And Black, Chinese, it's not white and Catholic. So I talk with a lot of my friends and from different countries, and one of my friends, he have it's called magic cards, and he told me, like, you need to take out 7 cards. I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's your cards. It's some native belief of the animals giving you power. So I just took the 7 cards and ran them, and that's my 7 animals, actually. I'm like, can I change it? I don't want to be a white boar. No, that's your animals. Okay, I'm set. Why I did this one? And I never drew myself. I'm not an egoistic freak. This is the first time I did myself, actually. It's because now when I'm back in Croatia, and I'm in Croatia for 2 months, I really feel I have like a lot of pressure because they try to forbid abortion, a lot of stuff, gay, hi, bi, just anything that is not Vatican Catholic, basically. And because I did read the Bible all the time, and I used to consider myself a Christian and blah, 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 it just didn't stick fine with me. And when I came back, and when the girls asked me to have a show, I don't know why, immediately in my head was, the beast from the Bible, the 7 dragon. Like, and then I realized I have 7 animals, and that's native belief, because Catholic doesn't really go well with anything native or nature, or, well, I'm not against Catholicism, just saying in Croatia. And so I actually drew myself putting a mask on myself with my 7 animals. And why is it that? Because in Croatia, they know me in art, but I don't show my face or my real name. So, I mean, people get it who I am if they see my hands, but my face, no. So it's actually just going through life with your belief. And I just realized down there when I was painting it, because I painted it on the wall directly, because I do paint outside. I paint buildings, and I do travel around and paint them, and street art. And whenever you do street art, sometimes if it's a big building, of course it stays. If it's 9 meters or 15, it's going to stay. But if you do anything small, and I drew all my paste ups by hand, so people, of course, it's small, but I lose like 3 hours painting one. People just cover it or destroy it, or who cares? And it's supposed to be like that. But I just realized when I was painting down there that actually all my stuff that I did in the galleries are painted over. So I think I will be in museums forever, because the one that I got the prize, not big ones, they painted over in white. The Museum of Contemporary Art painted over. Down there, it's going to be painted over. And the V&A one, actually the roll, before I came back to Croatia, I took the whole roll, take it outside, and staple it around London. So it's funny how it's functioned, because now it's in fancy museum, and now it's outside. In the museum, it's painted. Outside, it's destroyed. But who knows? I mean,
so many of your works are in the museums or in the galleries.
Yeah, forever. But they painted.
They're painted there, but they're not visible. I mean, it.
What, they're gonna scratch it?
When they
No,
when they come out.
I'm too tattooed. I'm not married with kids, so no, not yet.
But it reminds me of of maybe like the 2 kind of central pillars of the exhibition in general that you described, which is really on the one hand, you have said that this is a feminist, it's an all-women exhibition, and it is absolutely feminist in its intention. But then the other side of it, which is very important, is that it's about optics, it's about visuality and media, and it's about representation, right? About and many of the works seem to be actually about seeing and not seeing, about disclosure and withholding of information. I mean, it also it's something that is also very familiar to Sanja's practice, also in the use of imagery of images, in the juxtaposition of images that show and also hide something else. Would you say?
I don't know. Maybe we should open the discussion. Maybe you have some to be more democratic. You know, not other. But I think it's a great show. It's really a great show because they're great show, like Mladen Stilinovic, our friend, would say. Not necessarily because we are all women. You know, I think. Well, I'm proud to be part of it because I think all the artists are just amazing, you know, they're amazing artwork. And about visual, the title is really catchy. I think it's nice. So you want to see it, you have to see it. Yeah, I'm dealing with the visuals, you know, I'm a visual artist, and I think we all do. Yeah, we are dealing with the images, but I think I was actually thinking about something else, what might be a connection. It's the question, how do all of us deal, maybe, I don't know, all the artists well, but now I was thinking when OKO was talking and Cecilia, and it could be with me, but we can discuss about it. It's the way how we what's the urge to do art, you know, what's our actually I would say a political stand, you know, towards art as a luxury item, art as a you know, the market issue, and I think this is really very contemporary, I think strong in a way, you know. Of course, it's the question, you know, how do we personally, individually deal with this question, but maybe we could discuss this.
So you want? Okay, what's the political urge? Well, I think the political urge is multi-leveled. On the one hand, I think the most urgent political stuff now is the questioning of whether we as a species are really going to allow the total destruction of the biosphere, or are we going to stand for the rights of living things? So I was reading that there is extraordinary eco-feminist movement, and that actually started in the 70s. And this movement has been silenced so intensely that someone like me, I only heard about it recently, and I have been part of that movement without knowing it for 40 years. You know, so the need to suppress the voices that stand for the rights of all living things, not only the rights for human rights, but, you know, the civil rights. Every possible right is now under siege, you know, and look at what's happening with American democracy. American democracy, if it ever existed, is gone, you know. Exactly, you see, Americans still believe that this is a democracy. People like me who were actually in a participatory democracy, we know that it's not so. But you see, these lies, the suppression of the reality is really the big political thing. How do you bring the question so that the question becomes something so powerful and gutsy, that mobilizes the deep core of empathy and love that is being suppressed, you know, the care for each other. For example, 2 nights ago, I discovered this English philosopher who has a sort of, I suppose, a Yugoslavian name that's impossible to pronounce, Karinsky, perhaps, and I couldn't possibly, but if you look for revolution of human relations or a revolution of empathy, you're going to find him. And this extraordinary man is saying that the only possible revolution in this moment, and he's a young man, is a revolution of human relations. That is really an indigenous point of view. This is what, for me, as an indigenous person, this discrepancy between, let's say, the so-called morale of the invaders, where they can preach one thing and act differently. This is what the indigenous mind of all indigenous peoples of the world don't have room for, because of this empowerment I was speaking of, the empowerment that now the right to be treated fairly is already encoded in primates, in monkeys, you know, and it's equally encoded in us. So how come that we have given that up? So if any form of art or art action can mobilize this desire, this deep desire for fairness, then I think we as humanity have a chance.
And that's what feminists always did.
Of course. And then I think my final question for Weghave, related to the question of feminism, is also related to something that you said earlier, which was that this is the first time that you have, even though you've always had feminist undercurrents in your work before, that this is the first time that you've had an outwardly an exhibition that declares itself as being feminist. And I was wondering if there's something that in particular that made you feel the urgency now, as opposed to before.
Well, we started our curatorial work in the late 90s, and unfortunately things that OKO was mentioning were even harsher then, or maybe equally harsh, I don't know, meaning that we were really growing up in this like 90s atmosphere, was really these questions of nationalism and xenophobia, and also with the breakup of Yugoslavia, this complete amnesia about socialist past. So also all that for us was kind of a system of values, you know, which would be fairness and equal society and brotherhood and unity and so on. All of this was suddenly words that kind of didn't mean anything and that were absolutely erased from any kind of public discourse. So I would say that also for us as curators, this, you know, like desire was to try to work in a way so that we would try to use culture as something that can be politicized and then can contribute somehow exactly to this, what you were saying, kind of trying to empower people to look in the other direction, to think of a different set of values, and also to claim the right to look in a different direction, that what was absolutely, you know, kind of absorbed in all possible sphere of public life. And I think that for us also then feminism and women issues were very closely related to all of this, but it was always, there was this urgency that somehow the projects we did, so things like you mentioned, you know, exhibitions on Communist Manifesto, or for example, we were doing a lot of projects which were from different perspectives, touching, criticizing nationalism, criticizing this whole idea of amnesia about socialist past and so on. It was kind of part of it, but it was maybe not the most urgent thing, because it was always something that we thought, yes, of course, that part of it is also, you know, kind of fighting for women's rights, and us also being a female curatorial collective was in a way also always present in all the projects that we were doing. But unfortunately, I think that, as we all know, with the crisis and also with kind of, you know, the economic collapse, also what immediately happens is this very harsh reaction also on the position of women, very much in the system of production. So also we could witness it very much how, again, it was women, the ones who were losing the jobs first, who couldn't get other jobs. And also as one of the strong things that is still very present within this whole process is a sense of kind of patriarchy, not always leaving, but not ever leaving really the public sphere, but somehow being alive all the time. It also, in a way, very much influenced this fact that we felt that some things that we always almost like took for granted were suddenly going away. So, you know, it almost felt, of course, no, we don't have to discuss this, because of course that everyone is a feminist. And, you know, yes, of course that everyone is for, you know, like equality of women and so on. And this is a fight of everyone. And then suddenly it became much louder, this, I mean, almost like openly spoken beliefs that this is not so. So, for example, these controversies that OKO was already mentioning, that we have like a new women president, who, like in Croatia, the word president is different for man and for woman. And in the constitution, the only word that can be used is the word president for men. And she didn't have a problem to the masculine form. So she didn't have a problem to give an oath as a president in the masculine form, which was really, you know, like ridiculous. And especially with this huge public spectacle. And also she invited, you know, like all the thieves, corrupted politicians, war criminals. They were all sitting in this audience of her becoming president, and she was making this oath and kind of speaking about herself in the masculine form. So, you know, things like that. So a collapse of something which we really felt would not collapse more than it already did collapse. I think it kind of triggered us to try to speak more loudly, more directly about some of the issues connected to women's struggle that we all the time felt were very important. Maybe.
No, I can just add that the exhibition is feminist and we want to claim it as feminist, but the so-called women's struggle is not the only content of the show. It's very much interwoven with the different kind of struggles, especially, for example, with colonial history and how this history interconnects with the patriarchal societies throughout centuries, and also how both colonial history and patriarchy are kind of flip side of capitalist project since 500 years ago at least, or even longer, as Cecilia mentioned. So this is kind of, feminism is one of the perspectives and the kind of ground on which we build the show. I also would like to mention that there are a lot of, you will see there are a lot of human forms, a lot of figures in the exhibition, which I don't know, I didn't have time really to figure it out because we just started to set it up, and when we put it on the walls, we saw it. But I think it also has this element of like human forms, but interwoven with animals, like in the work of OKO. So there is really this affirmation of life that you were talking about, and what kind of feminist perspective can or has to do with this.
Yes, of course. Last year we saw lots of exhibitions and projects dealing with historical feminism, and in that sense we don't aim at kind of historicizing feminist movement or feminist art. On the other hand, there is a red thread running through the exhibition with such strong artistic positions, searching for the idea, what is the future of feminism? So in a sense that there are many things when we are reassessing this emancipatory potential of historical feminism. There are lots of disappointment, lots of ambivalence, lots of failure. And in that sense, it's a good starting point to start thinking of the future of feminism, in a sense that today, in a time of crisis, we see it as a part of the new social forms that are emerging or trying to emerge all over the world. And in that sense, maybe something personal. what I learned from working with Sanja more than 15 years is that this is something also related to the art world and to the art history. There is no such thing as a neutral position. And what I appreciate in her practice is that it always claims its own implication in a system of art, in a system of politics, in a state system.
Thanks so much. So I think maybe it's time to turn it to the audience if the audience has any questions.
Could you maybe turn the projector off? Because it feels like police interrogation here. Yeah.
I would like to ask Cecilia about the relationship between this work and a book that you put together called Ul, for Mapuche Poets, and what's like the trip from that piece in the 80s. Sorry. The relationship between this work that we're going to see in this show, that I'm dying to see, and that book that you edited.
Thank you, Francisca. Francisca is an artist from Chile who lives in New York, and we share this passion for poetry and performance. And so, yes, it's a surprising question. And I would say that when I was a little girl, I had tremendous passion, as I was saying, for the indigenous poetics of the Americas. And I felt that it was the most avant-garde conception of poetry that I had ever encountered. And coincidentally, I was a child of the 60s. I was born in 48, so in the early 60s, I was a teenager. I realized that that movement existed. I realized that much later. And it was given an American name called ethnopoetics, putting together the avant-garde poetries of the world and the indigenous poetries of the world. And that movement was discredited later in the 80s when the so-called political correctness identity movement came forth. Therefore, if you were not an Indian, forget about it. You are not going to be interested in indigenous poetics. And that became a sort of a form of violence against the indigenous poetry. And for example, when important political movements have started in America, I arrived in America in 1980, so this has always been a surprise for me to see the total depoliticization of the poetry movement in the US, starting more or less from the time I arrived. And so it's, for example, this movement that I admire so much became a total no-no, you know. So then, of course, I am not going to give up my passion because I still believe that indigenous poetry, even further, indigenous poetics, indigenous ways of seeing and seeing the world are so forward-thinking and are really the seed for the future. And if you start studying quantum physics like I do, you see the extraordinary connection between the indigenous poetics and these forward-thinking thoughts that not even scientists are ready to accept the philosophical consequences of their own discoveries. So I think that bringing together the indigenous poetics of the world to the fore. And for example, the Ul book that you ask is a book that is the first trilingual book that has these poems translated into English, into Spanish, but published at the same time in their own indigenous language, which is Mapudungun. And so for me, it was a fantastic training to do that book. But I did that book like 15, 18 years after I had done this film. So I suppose the connectivity between the projects is this belief that you have to give the right to speak to the person that is not given that right, you know. And so this has happened to me. I have always been censored, so I fully empathize with whoever has not the right to speak. And so that is the connection, and letting them speak for themselves.
Going once, going twice. Let's have a drink. Thanks.